Okay, so we've had some really fascinating conversations about leadership presence, right? And we've gotten some incredible questions and insights from all of you.
Yeah, it's a topic that really seems to resonate.
It does, and we thought it would be valuable to really kind of unpack that a little bit more deeply. Really get into the nitty-gritty of what leadership presence actually is and how you can cultivate it more effectively.
Yeah, think of this as a deep dive right into those core concepts, a way to really understand the essence of it quickly.
Exactly, like the essential understanding that you need to, actually start applying this stuff.
Absolutely. So to give everyone some context, this is actually the second in a series of deep dives we're doing based on this incredible set of resources you've shared about leadership and executive presence.
Right. And to kind of recap, the first one was all about inner alignment, right? Getting yourself grounded and clear on your values and your purpose.
Yeah, that's that inner compass, right?
Uh,
Getting your own house in order.
Exactly. And this one builds on that foundation. It's called leadership presence in your sources. And it's really about, okay, now that you've got that inner alignment, how do you actually project that outwards? How do you lead others effectively and authentically?
That's the key here. It's not just about leadership in a general sense. It's about how you show up as a leader, how you bring clarity, confidence, and real influence to the table.
And what's interesting is that a lot of times people think about leadership as, making decisions and giving directions, but this is really about something much deeper.
It is, because I think if we're honest, a lot of us have had those moments where we've thought, why doesn't my team really seem to get this? Or why do I feel like I'm talking to a wall sometimes?
Or even just like, why is leading this team so much harder than I expected it to be?
Exactly. And those are the exact kinds of questions that a strong leadership presence can help to answer. It's about understanding the nuances of how you lead, not just what you're leading towards.
Because even if you've got the best strategy in the world, even if your plans are, impeccable, if you don't have that leadership presence,
They can fall flat, right? It's that missing ingredient that can really make or break things.
it really is. And and when that presence is lacking, your sources point to some pretty consistent downsides.
Yeah, some pretty common patterns emerge. Things like low team engagement,
Hmm.
where people are just going through the motions but not really invested in the work.
Right, like they're physically there, but their hearts aren't in it.
Exactly. And then you see indecisive leadership, which can really create uncertainty and confusion within a team. Everyone's a little lost, not sure which direction to go in.
And what's interesting is, you can have a really decisive leader who doesn't have this kind of presence.
That's right. Because
Yeah.
decisiveness, without clarity, without that connection with the team, can just create more problems.
And then the third thing that your sources mention is this risk of creating a negative team environment.
Yeah, where open communication really breaks down. People don't feel safe to speak up, to share ideas, to voice concerns.
Yeah, and that can be toxic, right? It can really stifle innovation and creativity.
It absolutely can. But on the flip side, when a leader actively cultivates that strong leadership presence, the opposite happens.
You see a real transformation.
You do. You see trust deepening within the team. Decisions are made more confidently and often more quickly because there's that alignment and understanding.
And crucially, people feel empowered. They feel like they can truly contribute their best and that their voices are being heard.
It creates a virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
Trust leads to empowerment. Empowerment leads to better decisions, and better decisions reinforce that trust.
So it's not just about, the leader standing up there and, giving a rousing speech.
Right. It's much more nuanced than that. It's about how you interact with your team on a day-to-day basis, how you create that space for them to thrive.
So to get practical here, your sources break down leadership presence into three key areas.
Yes, three guideposts, if you will, that we can use to navigate this terrain.
And those are authentic communication and influence,
Right.
decision-making and agility,
Oh.
and empowering teams and shared governance.
Three really powerful areas to focus on. And they're all interconnected, as we'll see.
Let's start with that first one then. Authentic communication and influence. What's the real essence of this? What's the key for leaders to grasp?
Well, it might sound obvious, but the first thing is that you have to actually be authentic, right?
Right, like you can't fake this.
Exactly. People can spot a phony a mile away.
Yeah.
So it starts with being genuine, being true to yourself and your values.
But it's also about clarity, right? Making
Yeah.
sure that your message is clear and easy to understand.
Yes, but what's fascinating is that your sources emphasize that clarity alone isn't enough. You can be crystal clear in your communication and still not be influential.
So there's got to be something more to it.
There is, and it comes down to empathy. It's about truly understanding your team's perspective, their concerns, what motivates them.
So it's not just about getting your point across.
No. It's about understanding their point of view first.
Hmm.
And then, once you have that understanding, you can tailor your communication in a way that truly resonates with them.
So you're speaking their language in a way.
You're connecting with them on an emotional level, not just an intellectual one. And that's what creates real influence.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's less about, broadcasting your message and more about engaging in a genuine two-way dialogue.
Precisely. And that's where the authentic communication piece comes in. When you're authentic, you create a space for others to be authentic as well. And that's when real connection and understanding can happen.
Okay, so that's authentic communication and influence.
Yeah.
Second guidepost is decision-making and agility. In today's fast-paced world, agility seems like it would be the most important thing.
It is definitely crucial. But agility without a solid foundation can lead to chaos.
So it's not just about, making quick decisions on the fly.
Right. It's about being thoughtful and strategic, but also being able to adapt and pivot when necessary.
So you need that balance, right?
You do. It's about being decisive, yes, but also being open to new information and being willing to change course if the situation demands it.
And that can be a real challenge for leaders, right? Because you want to project confidence and certainty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But true confidence comes from knowing that you can handle whatever comes your way, even if it means admitting that you were wrong or that you need to adjust your plans.
That's that kind of humility that we talked about in the first deep dive, right? Being able to say, you know what, I made a mistake.
Exactly. Because when you can admit that you don't have all the answers, you create a space for others to contribute their ideas and perspectives.
And that leads to better decisions, right?
It does. Because no one person has a monopoly on good ideas. The best decisions are often the ones that are informed by a diversity of viewpoints.
So this kind of decision-making agility, it's about being confident in your ability to navigate uncertainty.
Yes. And to create an environment where your team feels safe to do the same. Because when everyone is comfortable with ambiguity, you can move much faster and more effectively.
And that's a huge competitive advantage in today's world.
It is. Because the only constant is change.
Which brings us to the third guidepost, empowering teams and shared governance. What's the core of this one?
In many ways, this is the culmination of the first two guideposts. It's about creating a culture where people feel valued, where their voices are heard, and where they have a genuine stake in the decisions that affect them.
So it's not just about delegating tasks.
It's not. It's about creating a true sense of ownership and accountability within the team.
And that starts with psychological safety, right?
Yes, this is something that your sources really emphasize. It's about fostering an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to share their ideas, even if they're different from the prevailing view.
Even if they're wrong.
Even if they're wrong. It's about creating a space where people know that they won't be punished or ridiculed for making a mistake.
Because mistakes are inevitable, right?
They are. And they're often the best learning opportunities. But if people are afraid to make mistakes, they'll never take risks. They'll never push the boundaries.
And that stifles innovation.
Absolutely. Innovation comes from experimentation, from trying new things, from failing and learning from those failures.
So psychological safety is essential for creating that kind of environment.
It's the foundation. And then the shared governance piece is about actually giving people a voice in the decisions that are being made.
So it's not just the leader making all the calls.
No. It's about involving the team in the process. It's about asking for their input, their ideas, their perspectives.
And that makes them feel more invested in the outcome, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because people are much more likely to support and implement decisions that they've had a hand in creating.
It makes sense. It's like, if you're asked to bake a cake and you get to choose the recipe, you're going to be more excited about eating it.
That's a great analogy. And it's the same with work. When people feel like they have a voice, they're more engaged, more motivated, and more committed to the success of the team.
It's funny you should say that because your sources actually use an example from the healthcare world with a nurse executive named Lisa.
Oh yeah, Lisa's story. It's a really common scenario, and it highlights how these three guideposts can play out in a real-world setting.
So tell us a little bit about Lisa's situation.
Sure. So Lisa's described as a very competent and dedicated leader. She's clearly skilled at what she does. But she's facing a challenge that a lot of leaders can probably relate to. Her team isn't responding to her initiatives the way she'd hoped.
What do you mean?
Well, she'll have meetings, she'll lay out her plans, and everyone will nod their heads and say, yes, that sounds great. But
But
then,
then nothing happens.
but then when it comes to actually implementing those plans, there's a lot of inertia. Things just don't seem to move forward.
Oh, man, I've been there. Yeah, it's so frustrating.
It is. And it's a common experience for leaders who haven't yet mastered this idea of leadership presence.
So let's break down Lisa's situation in terms of the three guideposts we've been talking about. Where might she be falling short?
Well, first, in terms of authentic communication and influence, it seems like while Lisa's good at conveying information, she might not be so good at connecting with her team on an emotional level.
Right, so she's telling them what to do, but not really explaining the why behind it.
Exactly. Or maybe she's not taking the time to really understand their concerns or perspectives. So her communication, while clear, might lack that genuine influence that comes from truly understanding and empathizing with your team.
And what about the second guidepost, decision-making and agility? Any issues there?
It sounds like Lisa might be a bit hesitant in her decision-making. Maybe she's second-guessing herself. Or maybe she's not projecting that sense of confidence and certainty that her team needs to see.
And that can be contagious, right? Like if the leader isn't sure, then the team's going to be even less sure.
Exactly. And that can lead to paralysis, where no one's willing to take ownership or make a move.
And finally, empowering teams and shared governance. How's Lisa doing in that department?
Well, it sounds like her team isn't really feeling empowered. They're not feeling like they have a real stake in the decisions that are being made.
So they're not being consulted.
No. Or if they are, it's more of a token gesture than a genuine attempt to get their input.
And that's a recipe for disengagement, right?
It is. Because if people don't feel like they're being heard, if they don't feel like they're part of the solution, they're going to check out.
So the key takeaway with Lisa's story isn't that she's a bad leader.
Not at all. She's clearly skilled and dedicated, but she's missing that crucial element of leadership presence.
And that's what's preventing her from achieving the results she wants.
Exactly. And the good news is that leadership presence is something that can be developed. It's not some magical quality that you're either born with or you're not.
It's a skill set that can be learned and honed over time.
Absolutely. And by focusing on those three guideposts we've been talking about, Lisa has the potential to transform her leadership and her team's performance.
So it's not about changing who she is as a person.
Right. It's about adding new tools to her leadership toolbox.
And becoming more conscious and intentional in how she shows up as a leader.
That's the key. It's about being more aware of how your actions and your words impact the people around you.
It really does all come back to that idea that leadership isn't just about what you do.
It's about how you do it. It's about how you make people feel.
Because at the end of the day, leadership is about people.
It is. It's about inspiring them, motivating them, and empowering them to achieve great things.
And that's what leadership presence is all about.
Exactly. It's about creating that positive ripple effect that starts with you and spreads throughout your team and your organization.
So for our listener out there who might be recognizing some of these dynamics in their own leadership, what can they do, like starting today, to strengthen their leadership presence?
Well, your sources provide a really great starting point. It's called the Leadership Presence Audit, and it's basically a three-step process for assessing your strengths and areas for growth.
Okay, I like a good actionable framework. So what's the first step?
The first step is self-reflection.
Mm.
Now, take some time to really think about how you're showing up as a leader.
So like a little introspection.
Yeah, exactly. Look in the mirror, so to speak, and ask yourself, where do I feel like I'm doing well, and where could I improve?
Be honest with yourself, right?
Brutally honest. Because this is about identifying those blind spots that we all have.
And specifically, you want to think about those three guideposts we've been talking about, right?
Yes. Authentic communication and influence, decision-making and agility, and empowering teams and shared governance. Ask yourself, where am I strongest? And where do I have the greatest opportunity for growth?
Okay, so that's step one, self-reflection. What's step two?
Step two is to seek feedback from your team.
So don't just rely on your own assessment.
Right. Because sometimes we have a very different perception of ourselves than the people around us do.
And that's where that valuable external perspective comes in.
It does. So the idea here is to go to your team and say, hey, I'm really trying to work on my leadership presence. What could I do more of or differently to better support you and the team?
Ooh, that can be scary, right? Asking for that kind of feedback?
It can be, but it's also incredibly valuable because your team is the one who's experiencing your leadership firsthand.
So they're in the best position to tell you what's working and what's not.
They are. And when you create that space for honest feedback, you're showing them that you're committed to growth and that you value their input.
Which builds trust, right?
It does. And it also helps you to see yourself through their eyes, which can be really eye-opening.
So step 1, self-reflection. Step 2, feedback from your team. What's the third and final step?
The third step is to take action.
Because knowledge without action is useless, right?
Exactly. So once you've done your self-reflection and you've gotten feedback from your team, it's time to identify one small, specific shift that you can make this week.
One small shift.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a huge overhaul, just one small change that you can commit to.
So for example, if you realize that you're not great at explaining the why behind your decisions.
You could commit to spending an extra 5 minutes in your next team meeting to really lay out the rationale for a particular decision.
Or if you're not great at asking for feedback.
You could commit to asking one specific team member for your thoughts on a particular project.
The key is to start small and be consistent, right?
Exactly. Because small changes, over time, can lead to big results.
And that brings us to the final piece of advice that your sources offer, which is journaling.
Ah, yes, the power of journaling. It's such a simple yet effective tool for personal growth.
And how do they suggest using journaling specifically for developing leadership presence?
The prompt is really interesting. They say to start by thinking about a recent situation where you felt like your leadership wasn't as effective as you would have liked.
So like a specific example.
Yeah. Like maybe you gave a presentation and it fell flat, or you tried to delegate a task and it didn't go well.
Something concrete that you can really analyze.
Right. So once you have that situation in mind, the next step is to think about how you could have handled it differently through the lens of those 3 guideposts.
So for example, if you felt like your communication wasn't effective.
You could ask yourself, how could I have communicated more authentically? Did I take the time to really understand my audience's perspective?
Or if the decision-making process felt clunky.
You could ask yourself, could I have been more decisive? Could I have been more agile in responding to changing circumstances?
And if the team didn't feel empowered.
You could ask yourself, how could I have created a more psychologically safe environment? Could I have involved the team more in the decision-making process?
So it's about using that real-world example to identify specific areas for improvement.
Exactly. And then the final step is to think about the potential impact of those changes. How might the situation have played out differently if you had handled it in a way that was more aligned with those 3 guideposts?
So it's almost like rewriting the script in your mind.
It is. And by doing that, you're not only learning from your mistakes, but you're also creating a mental model for how to handle similar situations in the future.
And the sources emphasize that it's not just about journaling in isolation, right? It's about actually applying those insights in the real world.
Absolutely. The real power comes from taking those lessons learned and putting them into practice.
So commit to making one small shift this week based on your reflections and see what happens.
Right. Observe how your team responds, how the dynamics change, and how you feel as a leader.
So to wrap up this deep dive into leadership presence, what are the key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest one is that leadership presence is not some mysterious quality that some people have and others don't. It's a set of skills and behaviors that anyone can develop.
And those skills and behaviors are rooted in those 3 guideposts we've been talking about.
Authentic communication and influence, decision-making and agility, and empowering teams and shared governance. Master those 3 areas, and you'll be well on your way to cultivating a strong and authentic leadership presence.
And I think the biggest aha moment for me is that leadership is not just about the decisions you make, but about how you lead.
That's such a crucial point. Because the how, the way you show up, the way you communicate, the way you empower your team, that's what really makes the difference.
It's a difference between just being a manager and being a true leader.
It is. And I think we can all strive to be better leaders, regardless of our position or title.
So to our listeners out there, I encourage you to take this to heart. Take some time for self-reflection, seek feedback from your team, and commit to making one small shift this week.
Those are the first steps on the journey to becoming a more effective and impactful leader.
And as you go about your week, I want you to keep this question in mind. What's one small communication shift that you can make in your next interaction with your team? How can you be more authentic, more empathetic, more influential? Because even small changes can have a ripple effect.
They can. And who knows, that one small shift might be the catalyst for a profound transformation in your leadership journey.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into leadership presence, and keep those amazing insights and questions coming. This is just the beginning of the conversation. We'll be exploring each of these guideposts in more depth in future deep dives, so stay tuned.
Yes, there's so much more to uncover, and we're excited to continue this journey with all of you.